In light of the evidence that Russia is struggling with its Ukraine invasion, the U.S. has warned Russian President Vladimir Putin that there will be, quote, catastrophic consequences, end quote, if the Russian leader were to use a nuclear weapon, which he suggested could be a possibility last week. The Biden administration has not said what those consequences might be and has declined to answer when asked if the response could include a direct fight. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. General Boykin is a founding member of the Army's elite Delta Force. He is the former Deputy Undersecretary for the Department of Defense for Military Intelligence, and he is the Executive Vice President here at the Family Research Council. General, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, I always get that title mixed up because, Army and intelligence just doesn't quite go together. But anyway.
Yeah.
So can you provide the latest you've been hearing on the situation in Ukraine? I mean, Russia is they're getting smacked. And Putin is calling up 300,000 reservists or recruiting, trying to get recruits. It sounds like he's in a pretty desperate situation.
Well, I think he is, and I have kind of said for the last few months that he really needed to maintain support on the home front. The mothers in Russia are not going to stand for having their sons come home in body bags, and that's exactly what's happening. And the Russians came out of Afghanistan after 10 years there because of exactly the same thing, and I think we're seeing history repeat itself as far as that goes.
Of course, the world's different. Putin, I think, has his back against the wall this time, and he said last week, quote, "We will certainly use all the means at our disposal," which many take was a clear reference to a nuclear threat. Is it possible that he might use at least tactical nukes there in Ukraine?
Anything is possible with him, but my personal view on this thing is that he is not going to do that. He's not going to resort to even a tactical nuke. First of all, his own people can't deal with that. I mean, he's got people in that battle space as well. And secondly, though, I think that if he does do that, I don't think that it necessarily will trigger a nuclear reaction from the U.S. or our other two nuclear allies over in the European Union there, or NATO, that being France and Britain. I don't think it necessarily means that we're going to respond with a nuke. I think that what it does mean, though, is that the war is over for Putin, because what we will do, I'm absolutely convinced, is we will bomb them. We will fire missiles into there. We will probably put very few troops, if any, on the ground. But I think that we'll have a bombing campaign like you have not seen probably in recent history.
All right. We were talking earlier with Congressman Mike Johnson. We were just talking with a mutual friend of ours, Admiral Dean Lee, about what's happened in the Coast Guard, where we're seeing, the Army only meeting 52% of its goal of recruitment this last year. But at the same time, we see nearly 100,000 soldiers in the pipeline to be pushed out for not getting the COVID shot. The Air Force is the same way. Do we have the capability to address a potential situation in Russia? And then I haven't even gotten to the issue with Iran yet. I mean, what is the state of our military?
Our military is in decline, Tony. There's no other way to put it. Our military is in decline. That is one of the reasons that you see the recruiting problems that are occurring right now, is young men and women all across America are watching what our military is doing. They're watching the way that our young men and women are being bullied by their chain of command. They're watching how they're wasting their time in these classes to make them more woke. And they are realizing that the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard are not good places to be right now, because they're not serious about the only mission that 4 of those 5 services had, and that is to win the nation's wars.
Admiral Lee made a point that you make very frequently, and that is you can't flip a switch and change this. That you're going to have, as we see now with this recruiting issue, we see seasoned. I mean, some of these are officers that are being pushed out of the military, men and women who have years of service and training that are being pushed out. This leaves a tremendous leadership gap. This is going to take some time to overcome, and quite frankly, to me, speaks as well to an election issue. You have to have those in positions of leadership in Congress, in the White House, that understand what you just laid out is the purpose of our military, and not to use them for, political gambits in this in their bigger pursuit of their ideological agenda.
Yeah, that's right, Tony. And the hardest thing to do is to put in new leadership that really understands and is focused on the mission of our military. And when you have a president and an administration that are choosing senior leaders based on whether they will support his woke agenda, and those that are not willing to are being told that it's time to retire, you've got a gap, you've got a void there. So even if we changed commander-in-chief tomorrow, who do you put in these senior positions? The people that are being brought up by this administration, well, that's not going to work. So we have got to, first of all, we got to choose wisely when we go to the polls, and remember that the commander-in-chief is the president of the United States. Secondly, the Congress has a lot to do with the readiness and the health of our military, and those people that will be on the armed services committees and those people that will be voting for things that have to do with the readiness of our military. We need to choose wisely. So there's nothing more important right now for us as Americans than to get the right people in the right positions to preserve the integrity and the readiness of our military.
So, General, I want to ask you a question. You've got these in the pipeline who have come up under these liberal policies, and so when a president comes in and he's choosing his military leadership, is there any way to circumvent this? If all you have in the pipeline are those that were weaned on wokeness, how do you fix it?
Well, you don't do it overnight, I can tell you that. I mean, you're going to have a commander-in-chief that understands the mission of the military and is willing to make hard decisions with regard to choosing the next level of leadership. But it's going to take time. You've got to raise up a new breed, a new generation that are battle hardened, but they also are people who focus on the men and the mission, not just a woke agenda or any other agenda outside of winning the nation's wars.
And so Congress can play a role in this as well, as in the ranks of the flag officers, the generals, the Senate weighs in on that. And so if there's evidence of those who have been a part of the woke wave pushing this in our military, they can weigh in when it comes time for them getting their stars and bars.
That is true, but they've got to have that information, and that information is not necessarily available to them when they get a list. For example, if you have a brigadier general list, they don't necessarily get the information on all of those people on that list unless someone has tipped them off. Now, at your direction, we did that when John McCain was still in the armed services business. We did that. We went and identified some of these colonels that had infringed on the rights, the First Amendment rights of people in the military. We went and said to Mr. McCain, would you please make sure that if this name comes out on any of these lists, that you have to confirm that you give them a hard look, because here's what they've done. And unless you've got people that are going to them and giving them that kind of information, they don't necessarily see that. So they're not the key to this unless they have the information.
Well, it sounds like a great project for retired flag officers, as you know, Admiral Lee was just on, to begin identifying those, and if and when we've got those in leadership that understand the importance of the military, they can weigh in on that. All right, General, before we run out of time, I want to switch to the issue of Iran. Jake Sullivan was on the weekend shows, and I want to play a clip of what he had to say on Face the Nation.
We're talking about diplomacy to prevent Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon. Okay. If we can succeed in that effort, and we are determined to succeed in that effort, the world, America, and our allies will be safer.
General, what's going on with Iran and the Biden administration?
Yeah, this is that's not true. What Jake Sullivan just said was not true, and I think that the analyst, when this thing came out in 2015, I believe it was, the JCPOA, even the analyst admitted that this put them on a pathway to a nuclear weapon, although it would draw it out for about 10 years. So to say that they're not going to get a nuclear weapon is just simply not true. And by the way, they have violated every provision of this JCPOA since it became effective in 2015. So this administration is, I don't know, they're tone deaf to any criticism of this. And think about all of the rioting that's going on over there right now, because these moral police or morality police killed this woman that was not wearing the hijab the correct way. And go back to last week when our president stood up and talked about how important it was for us to set the standards, my words, but to set the standards for democracy around the world. And now what are we doing? We are supporting a country that is abusing its own people, and we're about to give them more money and a pathway to a nuclear weapon. And I am appalled that this administration doesn't see the light on this.
But when you look at Iran and the Iranian people, they are aligned with us. They want freedom. This is just this regime that is bearing down on them. And if we were to go back to the way the Trump administration was dealing with him, to destabilize the Iranian regime, the people, quite frankly, could probably take care of a lot of this themselves.
Tony, I talked to a missionary that is living underground there in Tehran and has been for over a decade. And he told me and some others that are fairly well-known people that the people in Iran are so fed up with their government that it's only a matter of time until it's going to explode. And I think you may be seeing that right now. But he said they are fed up with not only the government, the mullahs that run the government, but they're also fed up with Islam, because he said they won't let the prayer call go out over loudspeakers because they call it noise pollution, because all they've seen is the absolute worst of Islam. And they are fed up with it, and especially the youth. So look, the president ought to be encouraging these people and not continuing down this path to giving them a nuclear weapon.
Because as long as we're negotiating with them, or at least they're talking about negotiating, we're only bolstering a teetering government to begin with.
That's exactly right. And where does it go? Where does it end? And I keep hearing this, we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon, but so far there's been no indications that they're willing to make the tough decisions with regards to this. Look, Donald Trump made a tough decision when he pulled out of this, but Trump was a realist. He understood what these people were about. He understood the passion they had for dominating the Middle East because they would be a nuclear power. And he also understood the threat to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other Gulf states there that have been at odds with Iran for many, many years.
Yeah, this actually puts the U.S. out of step with many of those in the Middle East, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others who are very concerned about Iran and their capability. General Jerry Boykin, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Tony.